Hello everyone and welcome back to TowerGate. It is TowerGate day number 506, Sunday, July the 29th, 2018. Thank you so much for tuning in to this Saturday morning edition. Alrighty, well, we're all getting ready to experience this summer vacation for Congress. They go on vacation for about 5 weeks. When they come back, I think they might have a very short schedule. Of course, they're still busy campaigning for the midterm elections. I think there'll be a lot of focus in the Senate on the confirmation of Judge Kavanaugh. That's probably what they're looking at on the Senate side. On the House side, I'm not really sure what they have in the agenda. Now, a couple weeks ago, we saw that Bob Goodlatte told Maria Bartiromo that they have about 27 witnesses that they want to interview, and that they'll and he said they plan on interviewing those witnesses over the summer. So I assume that means that he's going to have some members come in who are designated to come in and ask questions to these witnesses. Those were the three lists that Devin Nunes gave Goodlatte and Gowdy and said, hey, you need to interview these people. So we will try to follow up on that, although they generally don't announce when they're doing that. A lot of times you don't even hear about it. You don't even know what happened until months later when you read that they actually came in and were questioned. So sometimes it's hard to follow that, but certainly we'll do the best we can. But other than that, typically this is the 5 weeks in the summer where things get really, really slow because DC basically shuts down for about 5 weeks. Not a whole lot goes on during the month of August in DC. So we'll keep following the story, though, and there will be things happening, things going on. So we'll continue to follow that. But over the next 5 weeks, things will be a little odd because, again, it's not a lot going on. But anyway, we'll stay on top of things. Now, as I've said in multiple videos, ultimately, when you look at this FISA application, we know that it was based mostly off the dossier and also off the Michael Isikoff article in Yahoo News. Both of them rely on Steele, Christopher Steele, as their source. As I've said many videos ago and repeated multiple times, this could ultimately come down really to Steele, Christopher Steele, his credibility. His credibility is what was selling everything. Everything was riding on him. That's why they used him. I mean, he didn't put together the dossier, trust me. The information was fed to him, and he just turned around and regurgitated it right back to Confusion GPS. His role was to be the launderman, to launder the intelligence information, so-called intelligence information. His job was to put the face of credibility to it so that it could move through the various channels. So ultimately, when this comes down to the bottom line, as we're seeing happen in the BuzzFeed case, when you get right down to it, it was all sold on the credibility of Christopher Steele. It's all riding on him. We already know from his legal briefing, his court filing, and from his deposition, and he's now got to do another one. But we know from that what he stated is that, of course, that it was raw, unverified intelligence, uncorroborated. He didn't go out and get the information. It came to him. He used collectors who used intermediaries who went and got this information. We know that the two primary sources in the dossier who gave up most of the information that was considered to be most damaging would have been Mr. Milian and Mr. Mifsud. Now, both Mr. Milian and Mr. Mifsud have both stated that the things that are attributed to them in the dossier are things that they did not say. They both strongly denied that they were sources for the dossier, and they say the things that are in there that are attributed to them are false, not true. So here we have basically the credibility of the dossier really rides on Christopher Steele and these two individuals, Milian and Mifsud. They need to be able to go into court or sit in front of a grand jury or sit in front of a congressional committee and say, yes, we have strong confidence that this is all true, that everything we told you is true, we have reliable sources, we trust in the information. That's what you would need. But what you're getting is just the opposite. Just the opposite. That's why these people are in a lot of trouble. Now, when you take this thing and you think it through for the next 6 months, year, maybe a year and a half, or even 2 years, and you think it through where it eventually ends up, where it bottoms out, ultimately this is where it bottoms out. But in the meantime, there'll be very many other people who were involved. Very many people involved, and we know who they are. People in the FBI, the intelligence community, the State Department, the Obama administration. They're all going to be trying to save their little white asses, and Obama's too, and Jared. I guess they're all different colored asses, but they're going to be trying to save their asses on the credibility of the dossier, which is based on the sources, Milian and Mifsud primarily, and Christopher Steele. So they are going to have to try to rely on that to cover them. And so what they have to do is to continue what they've been doing, which is to say and try to make the argument that they believed that the information that they were getting was legitimate, was good source, was true. That's what they all have to stick to. They have to stick to it. And what happens if they all stick to that? What if everyone sticks to the story that they believed that the Steele intel was legit? Well, guess what? The Rotten Reverend is essentially gets thrown under the bus because she's the one who paid for it. And it's going to be exposed to have been garbage, which it already pretty much has been. But they're going to rely on it to the very bitter end because they have no choice. What are they supposed to do? Come out and say, yeah, we knew it was a bunch of BS, but we just needed something to launch this surveillance on Carter Page, to spy in the Trump campaign, to run the frame-up, and all the rest. No, they're never actually going to come out and admit that. So basically what's going on here is that as this thing plays itself out and eventually bottoms out, it's going to come down to the credibility of Steele, and it's going to come down to whether or not these individuals that I just mentioned are going to stick to the story, that they believed that the information coming from Steele, from the dossier, was legit. The only person who can't really use that argument is the Rotten Reverend and the people maybe very closest to her. They can't use that argument because ultimately when we get to the bottom of this, we're going to find that the people feeding Christopher Steele were coming from the Rotten Reverend Clinton's orbit. That's what we're going to find out. This could all end up backfiring completely on the Rotten Reverend. Everyone else could scapegoat and say, hey, we really believed it. The only person who can't say that is the Rotten Reverend, because it's going to be discovered that Blumenthal and Shearer and Weiner and all these individuals knew exactly where that information was coming from the inner circle of the Rotten Reverend Clinton, and that it was all a bunch of garbage being manufactured and then dispersed through various intermediaries and collectors and various other peoples, right back into the FBI, right back where they could launch the investigations. This ultimately, when I look at this thing in the long view, and I kind of see how it all shakes out, this is where it eventually bottoms out. I mean, you eventually are going to get to the original source for all of this stuff. Who was the source? And then it'll become a question of the credibility of that source, and then it will become a question of whether or not you can believe that the people who relied on that source, whether or not they really believed it, whether or not they were just pushing garbage that they knew was garbage. And that can sometimes be tough to prove, although I think it can be proven. But at least they'll have that in their corner. But the Rotten Reverend Clinton is not going to be able to do that. If she is found to be, and I believe she will be found to be, the people in her universe, the source, which was spreading all of this, she will not be able to use that argument. This could end up boomeranging very badly on the Rotten Reverend Clinton. So just my thoughts as I try to look a year or 2 years down the road to where this all bottoms out. And that's where it all bottoms out too. Christopher Steele, Mr. Milian, and Mr. Mifsud, none of whom are going to sit in front of a jury, a congressional committee, a judge, or anything else and say anything different than what they've been saying, which is it was raw intelligence. Well, Mr. Mifsud and Milian don't even claim that it's a fraud, that they shouldn't even be in the dossier. They didn't say those things. But Christopher Steele, he's kind of locked in. But he's been saying, and will continue to say, it was never meant to launch investigations. It was raw intelligence. He's not going to change his tune. That's where it is. So that's why I say it's all coming back to this small group of people. And it'll eventually find its way right back to where it began. and that will be the rotten Reverend Clinton. Now, we have a major follow-up bombshell. As you know, I mentioned to you a couple days ago that the judge in the BuzzFeed case has ruled that Simpson, Glenn Simpson of Confusion GPS, and the other officers, that means the other owners of the company, and any other employees that Mr. Gubarev's attorneys want to speak to, must stand for deposition in that case, and they must take the witness stand, and they must answer the questions. And the judge says, Mr. Simpson, you are going to have to tell us everything about that dossier. How you put it together, your sources, the whole 9 yards. You do not have those privileges. You don't have First Amendment. You don't have attorney-client. You have none of that. You're going to tell this court everything you know about that dossier, how you investigated it, how you verified it, if you ever did, where you got your information, how it was all put together, the whole 9 yards. Now we know, of course, just prior to that, the judge in the UK case, where it's Mr. Gubarev versus Christopher Steele, that judge ruled that Christopher Steele, who had been fighting it just like Simpson, also had to stand for deposition and will also have to sit in the witness chair and answer questions and tell his role in all of that. So between these two court cases with Mr. Gubarev, these civil suits, both Simpson, all the officers of Confusion GPS in Florida in the BuzzFeed case, and Christopher Steele over in the UK, in both these cases, both judges have ruled both have to give depositions, as well as in the case of Fusion GPS, their other officers, employees of the company, all have to give depositions, and all of them have to appear in court and take the witness stand and answer the questions. That's what those two judges have ruled. It's going to be these civil cases that flush this stuff out and force the hand of the folks there in DC. Their hand is going to be forced by what comes out of these civil cases, because as soon as the case is done, everything will be available to the public. But there's something more important that came out of this latest ruling from this judge in Florida that I didn't see in the original story that's now being reported. And that is this. The Democratic National Committee must also provide all evidence used to make the claims against Webzilla and XBT Holdings. That's Mr. Gubarev's companies. They want to see all the clues and technical data from as well as the forensics from the examination of the server. The judge has ruled in this Florida BuzzFeed case that the DNC must also answer some questions, give deposition, provide documents, forensic and technical data. They have to show what evidence they had that made it okay for them to make the claim that Mr. Gubarev's company, Webzilla, part of XBT Holdings, was responsible for the hacking of the DNC. That is a major issue right there. It's one thing to have Christopher Steele and Glenn Simpson, but it's another thing when you have to have the DNC, because who was running the DNC at that time? Well, pretty much the rotten Reverend Clinton. Debbie Wasserman Schultz was running it for the rotten Reverend Clinton. But now, this means that the Democratic National Committee will have to produce the CrowdStrike report, which Mr. Gubarev's attorneys and his computer experts are going to go over with a fine-tooth comb. It's very likely that the entire Russia hacked the DNC narrative is about to be destroyed in court in Florida in the BuzzFeed case, because the DNC not only has to provide the technical and analytical data from their servers and all other clues, all information. The judge says, hey, DNC, you've got to come in this courtroom with all your evidence and take the witness stand and all your witnesses, and you've got to tell us what evidence you had to make the claim that Mr. Gubarev's company hacked your system. You've got to show us the proof. Bring it all. Show us everything you got. Put it on the table. Well, when they do that, it's going to expose the fact that Mr. Gubarev's company never hacked the DNC. And it might even be proven that no Russian entities hacked the DNC. It might even be proven that there was no hack at all, and that the information that was taken from the DNC was downloaded internally within the local area network, inside the building. This is a major development. This is a major development. Now, this case resumes in November. Very interesting timing. Be nice if it would happen now, but unfortunately it's not now. But it is going to happen right after the midterms. Boy, think about that. So if all these things happen, the Republicans hold the House, they hold the Senate and gain some seats, the economy and all the other things keep going very well, President Trump, and unfortunately for the Republicans, as weak and lame as they are, they're going to be in a much, much more powerful position in the fall after the midterms than they are today. And at the same time, if you have the DNC and Christopher Steele and Glenn Simpson and all those people having to do with the dossier, having to do with the server and all of that, if you have all that stuff that gets flushed out in the civil case, both in the UK and in Florida, if that all gets flushed out in the fall and probably early winter as well, we'll probably go into the early winter time, if all that gets flushed out, in addition to everything else, you talk about the walls collapsing in, you talk about the dominoes falling, whatever term you want to use, you talk about the wheels coming off the bus. When that all happens, believe me, it's curtains for a lot of people. Curtains. The entire plot will be exposed. And so, like I said many months ago, it is likely these civil suits that are going to unravel the truth and lead to the indictments, convictions of a lot of people in the swamp, including the biggest monster in the swamp, the rotten Reverend Clinton. We'll be watching these cases very closely. Here's another thing that's very interesting. The memo that was the most damaging of all the memos was the last memo of the Steele dossier, Memo 17. That is the one also, which is the one that they're really focused on in these two court cases, because it was in Memo 17 is where Mr. Gubarev's company, XBT Holdings and Webzilla, that is where the accusation that he, working as an agent for Putin or the Russian government, performed the hack for Putin or the Russian government. That was the memo where Mr. Gubarev came into play. It's also the one where the whole idea of Trump working with Russians, hacked the DNC, released to WikiLeaks, blah, blah, blah. That all came in this 17 memo. And so that's all going to be flushed out. So we learn that last memo was published by Christopher Steele and sent to Fusion GPS from Steele on December the 13th, 2016. December 13th, 2016. That will be more than a month after the election. Now, apparently, the Rotten Reverend Clinton, according to Mr. Elias and Perkins and Coy, say that the Rotten Reverend Clinton stopped paying them in the month of October. That's when they stopped paying Perkins and Coy to pay Fusion GPS, to pay Christopher Steele. They stopped paying in October. But here we learn that the last memo wasn't put out till December 13th. That's December 13th. That's a month and 5-6 weeks after the Rotten Reverend quit paying. So who was paying Christopher Steele after that? Well, I think there's overwhelming evidence, and I think Congress has actually seen this, we just haven't seen it, that shows that the FBI, now we learn possibly the State Department as well, were actually paying Christopher Steele after the Rotten Reverend quit paying. So this could be very interesting, because that means you could make the argument, Mr. Gubarev's attorneys could certainly make the argument, that it was the FBI or the State Department the American government essentially that paid for Memo 17, which is the one that accused Mr. Gubarev. So now you wouldn't just be talking about the rotten Reverend Clinton paying Perkins Coie, paying Fusion GPS. The ultimate party of responsibility at this point could very easily be that it was the FBI or the State Department paying Confusion GPS to pay Christopher Steele, or paying Christopher Steele directly. And it was his information that fingered Gubarev. Essentially, Steele working, essentially the way Gubarev's attorneys can look at this in the court case is that the American government, the FBI, the CIA, the State Department, somebody in the American government was paying Christopher Steele to put in his report that Mr. Gubarev is the one who hacked the DNC and did all these other things, working for Putin, trying to fix the election, whatever. That definitely changes the equation a great deal. Be interesting to see how we'll learn how Mr. Gubarev's attorneys, which direction they go with that, and whether or not they even go down that road. They certainly could, based on the timing of the release of the Memo 17, and who was actually paying Mr. Steele at the time that that memo was released. Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. That's why you got to keep paying attention and don't lose the faith. Truth is coming out. Whether it comes out in D.C. or whether it comes out in Florida, in the U.K., it'll likely come out in civil cases before it will ever come out in D.C. Because you don't have Mr. Rodenstein blocking anything down in Florida. They don't care about Mr. Rodenstein in Florida. That's a judge. He tells them what they're going to do and what they're not going to do. And no one can tell him any different. It's a federal court judge. Now, we talked a little bit, again, about Diane turning your guns, Mr. and Mrs. America Feinstein, wanting to re-excavate the conversation about Trump Tower meeting. And I said, great, please do. Only this time, instead of Republicans not actually connecting the dots, not even seeing it, this time, hopefully, they will. Of course, that committee she sits on will not. That's the Senate Intelligence Committee. It would have to be the House Intelligence Committee, but this is exactly what they should do, is take it up again, or maybe let the Judicial Oversight Committee take it up again so that those people could explain exactly what did happen at the Trump Tower meeting. So I just want to go through this again with a little more detail because we know a little more even than the last time I went through this. So let's just go through these two main characters, a couple main characters that are really instrumental in the whole thing that went down. Of course, you have Veselnitskaya, you have Mr. Goldstone, you have the Agrilovs, Eman and what's his name, Eman and his son. They are the primary players, and of course, Mr. Ashmeaton. And to see the connections between the Clintons and all these people, we just need to do a quick review of that based on testimony they gave to the Senate Judiciary Committee and the Oversight Committee. So let's just relive this again, and I'll go through it again for you. So we have Mr. Goldstone, Rob Goldstone, the publicist for the younger Agrilov, the pop singer, the Russian pop singer. Mr. Goldstone said, this is his sworn testimony under oath, when he was interviewed, he admitted that he used hyperbolic language, the strongest hyperbolic language, in order to secure the request from Donald Trump Jr., and he said that was based on the facts he was given. He said his job, Mr. Goldstone said under oath, my job was to get a meeting. And his client was Eman Agrilov, the Russian pop singer. His father is Aris Agrilov. Now let's go through that email again that Rob Goldstone sent Trump Jr. It reads as follows. Eman just called and asked me to contact you with something very interesting. The Crown Prosecutor of Russia met with his father, Aris, this morning, and in their meeting offered to provide the Trump campaign with some official documents and information that would incriminate Hillary and her dealings with Russia and would be very helpful to your father. This is obviously very high level and sensitive information, but it's part of Russia and its government's support for Mr. Trump, helped along by Eris and Emin. What do you think is the best way to handle this information, and will you be able to speak to Emin about it directly? I can also send this to your father via Rona, that's his secretary, but it is ultra sensitive, so wanted to send it to you first. Okay, obviously, there's so many problems with this. So many problems. First of all, if high-level people, Russian intelligence, the Russian government, wanted to assist the Trump campaign and give them dirt on Hillary, they certainly wouldn't go to this flamboyant real estate developer whose son's a famous pop singer and have them contact a man like Goldstone, a PR guy, to have them go to Trump Jr. at Trump Tower. That's not the way Russian intelligence takes care of business. They would find a much better, more secretive way of doing that. So that's the first red flag that should go up immediately. But there's another red flag that should go up even quicker, and that is the fact that there is no such thing in Russia as a crown prosecutor. This is a made-up title. There is no such thing as a crown prosecutor. And if it was a crown prosecutor, he would be in a lot of trouble for giving this information to Mr. Agorlov. Not only would he be in legal jeopardy because he would have obstructed whatever it was he was working on, but this would be classified information, as is made perfectly clear by Mr. Goldstone. This is obviously very high level and sensitive information. It is part of Russia and the government's support for Mr. Trump. You see, this is very highly classified information, just as he says. But where does he say it? In the open body of an email. Not encrypted. Not through a source. This is not the stuff you do through email. So he goes to lay out that he's got this super secret information and he puts it open source in that freaking email. Not encrypted or anything. Yet it's very high level and sensitive information. He's disclosing something as high level as that the Russian government wants to work with Trump to help rig the election against Hillary. He's putting this open in an email. Working from a PR guy, a pop who manages PR, pop people, pop stars, coming from a real estate developer's son who is a pop star, managed by Goldstone, who apparently was given this mission by a high-level Russian member of their version of the Justice Department or something. I mean, this is insanity. Insanity. Just this alone. Just the email. Just sit there and read the damn email in Congress to Senator Diane Turn In Your Guns, Mr. and Mrs. America Feinstein. If you can't figure out exactly what this is all about, that this is obviously something that is crazy, it's got to be a setup. It can't be true. It can't be real. The Russians are not this stupid. Not this stupid. If there was really real information, I really wanted to help the Trump campaign, they wouldn't have gone about it this way. It just makes no sense whatsoever. It's obviously a setup. This email was sent for the very purpose of being used as nothing more than evidence. And why should we think that the Agorlovs and Mr. Goldstone are big fans of Trump? They're most likely exactly the opposite when you look at the crowd that they run around with. Then we have Veselnitskaya. She admits to having Eris Averlov to set up the meeting. So now we learn that it wasn't from what Goldstone testified to, was that Mr. Averlov had a meeting with this high-level guy in the justice system at Russia who gave him this information, but Veselnitskaya is telling us it was she who contacted Mr. Agorlov to set up the meeting. And Veselnitskaya was essentially representing Eris Agorlov, who wanted a meeting to talk about the Magnitsky Act. Then Goldstone says later in his hearing, when he's being testifying under oath, he says that, quote, "It appears It was a bait and switch, and I was utilized to set up everything. Yes, you were, Mr. Goldstone, but I'm not so sure how innocent you are. But yes, it was based on deceptive pretenses. He doesn't seem to be upset about it. He played his role and probably pocketed some easy money. Then we have Mr. Akhmetian, who testified that he knew Glenn Simpson for over 10 years. Akhmetian was working with Veselnitskaya on the Magnitsky Act, and he was one of the lawyers for Prevezon. Both of them worked as legal representation on the Prevezon case. Both were working for or with Confusion GPS. So Simpson was working with both Akhmetian and Veselnitskaya. Glenn Simpson, wrote the notes and the statement used in the meeting at Trump Tower, and he met with Veselnitskaya both before and after the Trump Tower meeting the same day. Akhmetian was a source for Simpson when he was at the Wall Street Journal many years ago. He's former Russian military intelligence. Akhmetian was also at the Halifax conference where Senator Magoo was told about the dossier. Akhmetian says his relationship dates back to the 1990s with Hillary Clinton. Says he knew people on the Clinton campaign. He dined with the Clinton attorney, Mr. Lieberman, on the very night of the Trump Tower meeting. Lieberman's recently deceased wife was one of the Right Reverend Clinton's closest friends. Her name was Evelyn, and she was also the Right Reverend Clinton's chief of staff when the Right Reverend Clinton was First Lady. She also worked as Bill Clinton's deputy chief of staff, and who was the one who transferred Monica Lewinsky out of the White House to the DOD after the Lewinsky scandal became public. Akhmetian also knows Senator Magoo very well and may have said hello to him at the Halifax International Conference. He also said he had friends who worked for Senator Magoo's presidential campaign, and he also knows very well David Kramer. And we're going to learn when this case is all said and done that it was David Kramer, Magoo's right-hand man, who passed the dossier to BuzzFeed, who then published it, and that's how all this got started, which means that Mr. Kramer, which is why they were interested in getting his deposition, may also be facing a possible legal liability, because when the case ends, when this case is over, Mr. Gubarev's attorneys will then use another law firm, which they've already hired and has already begun working on it. 6-8 months ago, we reported on that. They're already working on the settlement. They're working on exactly who they're going to be able to shake down. Anyone who was a part of putting Mr. Gubarev into that memo or spreading or disseminating the false information is liable to be sued by Mr. Gubarev for damages. And Mr. Kramer, Magoo's right-hand man, if he's the one who passed the dossier off to BuzzFeed, would be someone who would be in line to get sued. Obviously, Confusion GPS, Christopher Steele, but he's got Christopher Steele one-on-one in the UK, and he is going to shake down Christopher Steele for a few million, I'm sure. Mr. Gubarev is going to collect money from a lot of people in this circle. His lawyers are also going to uncover exactly everything about that dossier, how it was put together, who put it together, how it was investigated, the whole 9 yards. Both Steele, Confusion GPS, and now we know the Democratic National Committee are going to have to give up the goods. They're going to have to present the truth about what really happened. And once that all comes out, everything else falls like dominoes, because this is where everything rides. Everything rides on that dossier and Christopher Steele. The dossier and Christopher Steele. The entire case. Everybody's ass is riding on that. And we already know that Christopher Steele ain't gonna lie to save him. Nor will Glenn Simpson. Nor will any of the rest of them. And it's all going to boomerang back to the very beginning where it started. And I believe there are 3 central figures who were collaborating together to put it all together. And that would be, this is what the evidence shows us now. The Right Reverend Clinton, John Brennan, Mr. Potato Head, and Barack Hussein Obama. That three-headed monster is going to be revealed when we get to the bottom of this. Believe me. Thank you so much for tuning in. I will be back tomorrow. See ya. Bye.